In this video, I want to talk about general arrangement drawings. Now, as you know, in COMOSYS or even in general, when you're dealing with 3D modeling programs, what you have several different types of drawings, and you have automatic drawings. These are drawings like assembly drawings or part drawings. But then you also have what we call semi-automatic, if you will, drawings like general arrangement drawings. And a general arrangement drawing is basically something which tells you where the location of the assemblies, and it's basically used for during the erection of the structure. Now, to create these general arrangement drawings, what you need to do is, after you've done with the model, after your model is complete and you're satisfied with it, and you want to now go ahead and create your plan views and your section views in your drawings, what you do is on the left hand side in the Explorer, if you go to the bottom, you have this drawing section over there. And when you double click that, it takes you to the drawings manager side basically. And this is a different environment. If you see, the menus have all changed over here, and here we have different. There's an edit menu, there's a dimensioning menu, there's an annotation menu, there's a tables menu, there's a tools menu, etc. But right now we want to begin with how to basically create an empty drawing. So if I at the top of the left hand side, even this Explorer has changed. It's different from the Explorer on the modeling side. Over here you have the drawings manager at the top, and then you have modeling views, and over here basically you have all the views which you created on the modeling side. They're waiting for you on the drawing side as well. We have open drawings and you have model views, etc. But what we're going to be using primarily over here is the top option over here, which is drawings manager. If I double click that, this opens up, and over here I have this option of saying create a drawing, and if I press that, then it opens up the dialog box. I can give it a name. So let's say I call it GA1, general arrangement 1. You can choose a paper size. Let's leave it at A0. You can choose an orientation. You can give it a type. So it can be any type, a steel general arrangement drawing, a steel assembly drawing, single part, although these are created automatically, but you can also create them theoretically manually as well. Multi-assemblies, grating drawings, you can have different types over here. But let's say I want a steel general arrangement drawing, and these are the margins, and there can be some note as well. So let's just press OK. When I do that, this drawing is created, and when I press this close button over here, it says, do you want to save the changes? Yes, I want to save this drawing immediately. And if I then zoom out a bit, you can see that this drawing, this orange border is the outer border of the A0 drawing. Right now there's nothing in the drawing, and we'll talk about how we can import different stuff into this empty. Now, when we think of general arrangement drawings, what do we typically have in these drawings? So the first thing we have are these viewports, these windows which are looking into the model. These are what we call viewports in COMOSYS. And inside this viewport, obviously, you have some steel or concrete, or a mixture of steel and concrete, or basically the structure, however you are looking at it. And then beyond that, there are dimensions. So the steel or the concrete could be dimensioned. So that's the second thing which you have in these viewports. And the third thing are these annotations, which are basically whatever fields you want to write on those members which you see on the screen. So there are three things. There are viewports, there are dimensions, and there are annotations. These are the primary big three of creating any general arrangement drawing. And then obviously you have your title blocks, and you can have some notes if you want, and you can have some other objects which you draw manually, or you can import a DXF file into it. But those I'm not really counting at as my top priority right now. 95% of a GA drawing is basically the viewports, creating the dimensions, and creating these annotations. So that's what we will be talking about primarily in this little training session. So now coming back to our empty drawing, which we started off with, we're going to now talk about how do we put those viewports inside this empty drawing. So we're on the drawing side. We came here to the, this is not the modeling side. The modeling side you can go back to by pressing this button over here as well. If you press that, you will go back to the modeling side. Then if you want to go back to the drawing side, you just need to double click on the drawings, this item over here again. And when you do that, you get back to your drawings. And we've created this drawing, which we called GA1. If you remember, we gave it a size of A0, and we've got some basic fields in there. So this is an empty drawing right now. And the first thing we want to do is put a viewport inside it. Now, if you remember, we had said that below this drawings manager, we have these modeling views. And over here, you have all the views which you created in the model. These are basically the same as, so if I were to go back to the modeling side, you have these views over here. The same views which you have over there, you also have on the drawing side. So if I were to double click on the drawings one, the same views appear over here. And any one of them I can actually bring into my empty drawing. So let's start off by, say I want to bring in this 23,000 planet elevation 23,200 into my empty drawing. Now what I will do for that is I will just go and click on this one, click on the planet elevation 23,200, right click and say create a viewport. And the moment I do so, a viewport will be created with whatever default settings you have, and we'll talk about those settings in a second. So now that I have this viewport, what can I do with it? So the first thing, and the most obvious thing I can do with it, if I bring my mouse near the corners, or over here, you can see it changing the cursor. At the corners, I can resize it. So I can open it up a bit more if I wanted to. That's the first thing I can do with it. And the second thing I can do with it is I can, if I go to the midpoints, I can actually move it around. I can move it around wherever I want inside the drawing. So these are the two basic things. You can move a viewport around, you can resize it. And once you've resized it, you might want to relocate the stuff which is showing. So let's say I really made it a bit, let's make it a bit bigger. And I want to relocate all of this into the center of this viewport. What you do for that is you press the control key and you press the middle mouse button, and you can move it around, move your structure around the viewport. And that's a very convenient way, rather than going in and double clicking and then entering a lot of dimensions in the X and Y directions. You basically move it exactly where you want to move it, and you can just leave it like that. So this is a very convenient way of managing your viewport. The next thing you can do with the viewport is actually double click anywhere inside the viewport, not on the members, but anywhere where there's nothing, or you can double click this border as well. And when you do that, the viewport property editor appears. And this has got several tab pages at the top, and we'll be going through all of them because they're all important. When you come to the general tab page, here you see that you can give the viewport a name. And by default, it will automatically bring the name of the model view which you imported. But you can change that if you want to. But this is the default you will get. The next thing of importance over here is the scale over here. So if I were to change this to, say, 30 and then press apply, the scale would be changed. The viewport would not be resized, but whatever the scale of the things showing inside it would be rescaled. If I wanted to refit the viewport as well, I would just need to press this fit button. And when I do that, it fits it once again to fit in the boundaries of so it fits the boundaries of the viewport to fit the structure showing inside it, basically. So over here, we also have this option, which is very important, which is how do you want to actually draw this viewport? And in COMOSYS, you have several options. You can draw it in the line mode. And in the line mode, you basically see your structure in the form of lines. And sometimes when you're dealing with analysis related results, or maybe you want to show your joint numbers or your profile numbers and to corroborate with your analysis reports, you might want to just display them as lines. So you have that option. You can even, by the way, you can go and change individual elements to lines as well, and I'll show that as well. But there's a wireframe option, which is basically, it's a non-hidden line view. So in this case, if I were to zoom in, you can see or maybe you can't see because this is already very nicely done. But if this was extending inside it, you would still you would not see it as hidden line view, and you would see it as a non-hidden line view. But coming back, what you would normally use in a steel drawing would not be the wireframe one. What you would use the full dashed. So the hidden line means that the hidden line check is done, and the full dashed one would means that even if something is showing behind something, or its own hidden lines are behind something, then they should also be shown. This is the one you would normally use in a steel general arrangement drawing, unless you're doing a 3D drawing. If you're doing a 3D view, then you will use the normal hidden line view because you don't want too many hidden line things showing. But the full dashed one is one you would normally do with plans and sections. So this is one I'm going to use, and you see that the moment I do that, my hidden lines are also shown. Now, let's see what else of importance do we have over here. There are some collapse related parameters. These are to do with assembly drawings. I'm not going to talk about them right now. Okay, so I think these are the more important. If you want, you can change the rotation. So if it was a 3D view and you wanted to slightly modify the rotation, you could do that by modifying these three numbers over here. What else I can tell you right now? I think this is enough for the general tab for the moment. The next thing which I can do is I can move on to this label settings tab over here, and this has to do this is everything to do with this label which you see on the bottom of the viewport, which is basically the name you've given to the viewer. You can change it manually. So it says plan at elevation 23,200. You can place this label in different locations. So if I were to choose this and say apply, it will go to the top. If I choose this one, it will go to the bottom right. I can put it in the bottom middle as well. Basically all these 6 anchoring points. And besides these anchoring points, I can give it a further offset. So if I were to, for example, give it a further offset of say 25 millimeters, it would move it. These are millimeters in actual page size. So I can give it an offset to the right. I can give it an offset to in the downside as well. So I've got some control over where I want to place that. Another thing I can do is I can locate it outside the viewport if I wanted to. And if I press apply, it will be located outside the viewport. It will still be attached to the viewport. So if I were to move the viewport around, the label will go with it. And so it's not that it gets detached. So I can use that option, locate it outside. I can obviously change the size of the font. So if I were to bring it back in and say I want a bigger, let's say I want to make it 25 millimeters high, I can change that. I can change the font, obviously. I can give it a different label from over here. So these are basically all these settings have to do with this label which we have on our viewport. The next tab is the detailing tab, but I'm going to go past that and go on to the filtering tab, which is more important. I'll come back to the detailing one. So in the filtering tab, you see these up-down limits. These are your classical up-down limits, which you also have on the modeling side for each view. You can change them. So I'm going to change them to 1 meter, 1 meter up and 1 meter down. The downside needs to be entered as minus. You also have minimum X and minimum Y, maximum X and maximum Y limits if you wanted to. And if I press OK, you will see that some things will change. So there were certain elements in that floor which were not entering these up-down limits, and they've been added now. And also you see certain plates are also showing which were not showing previously. So by modifying my up-down limits, I can actually get exactly the kind of depiction which I want, or include whichever members which I want. Now, if you remember, I talked about this full dashed setting over here. This is the kind of result when you get the full dashed setting. If it was the wireframe setting, then you would get a slightly different version, in which case there would be no hidden line mode. If it was just the hidden line one, then we will get something like this. And if it was the full dashed one, then you will get your proper steel GA type drawing. So coming back to the topic at hand, let me just double click on that one, go back to the filtering one. So this plus 1000 minus 1000 is available to you. You can modify these numbers according to your need. Let's continue with the same filtering options. So over here we have this partial or full option, what that tells the program is whether you only want to include those elements which completely fall into these up down or min x, min y, max x, max y limits, or you want to include also those elements which partially lie within these limits. So for example, normally in a plan view you could see the columns. So if I were to close this and zoom in there, you can see that you're seeing the columns over there. Let me get a better column view. Yeah, so here you can see the column over here, but this column is actually a part of this column is outside the limits of 1000 plus minus 1000. And if you did not want to include this column in the view, what you could just do is you could go to the filtering and say full. And if you said that, only those elements which completely lie inside the view would be shown. So this column would be filtered. Even the sag rod which is coming from the other direction, which is showing partially now, if I were to say OK, both of them will disappear from the screen, because now you have the full filtering option, in which only those elements completely lying in these up down limits will be shown. Normally you can leave it on as partial as well. Let's bring them back on, and we can continue with our checking this option of filtering once again. Now, so you understood these. This is partial, full. This is pretty easy to understand. And this is the next most important one, which is the actual filter settings for this view. So within these up-down limits, you still have all your objects, but you can further filter which particular objects you want to show. So if I were to press the filter settings and go to my filter, it has many options, from general to object types to groups to profiles to plates to solids to macros, rebars, analysis and design related filters, user defined attributes. So for example, I have object types. So I can say that, okay, I don't want to see the say bolts. If I turn off the bolts and say okay, you can see that the bolts have disappeared from the screen. You no longer see the bolts. If I were to go in there and turn on the bolts again and say okay, now the bolts are visible in your view. So these filtering options, if I were to go back in there, let's see what we have. The first control you have is the object types, in which you can choose whether you want to see the grid, the profiles, the dimensions, the joints, the construction lines, the construction circles. These are coming from the model, if you remember. Rebars, any cuts you might want to see. You might be wondering, why would I want to see cuts? But in concrete drawings, you can actually annotate your cuts, and we'll talk about them later. Do you want to import the welds, external drawing objects, super shells, density lines? So all the objects which basically exist in the modeling side, you can decide whether you want to include them in your drawing or not. And in steel drawings, obviously, you will not want to include super shells and stuff like that. So you decide which objects you want. Then you have your grouping options, and you can create as many groups on the modeling side, and those groups can be filtered over here. You can choose which particular profiles you want. So you might want to say that I only want to see the beams and not the columns and the horizontal braces and the vertical braces. And if you do that and press OK, then only the beams will be filtered out, and all the other columns and horizontal braces will be gone. Similarly, you can say I want the beams and the horizontal braces, and this time they will be shown. Or what you can also do is you can say I want the beams and the horizontal. I don't want the beams and everything else besides those. So this is a not filter in a way. So if I say, this would mean don't show me the beams and the horizontal braces. And if I were to press OK on that, basically most of the structure will disappear. So these are very powerful filtering options for choosing by beam groups. You can choose by profile types. If you want eye profiles, angles, channels, round tubes, square hollow sections, T profiles, whatever the profile types we have in COMOSYS, you can choose by that. You can choose by material. You can choose by assembly numbers if you only wanted to see assemblies with certain prefixes or some actual assembly numbers. You can choose that. You can select particular profile IDs or profile names. So you can say I only want to see the IPE 300s, if you will. This grouping option is unique because you can create arbitrary groups on the modeling side, and you can just select anything, and they may not be following any pattern, and you can put them in a group, and over here you might ask the program to filter that group out for you. Let's bring them back on. And if I were to go back in and see, if we talked about the profiles. For the plates, you can talk about their usages and their types and their plate IDs. You can, for the solids, you have a lot of different options. I don't want to go into the details of all these filtering options. You can decide which particular macro you want to import as well. For rebars, you can have the types of rebars and their parent types, certain diameters you want to include or not include. So there are a lot of actions, a lot of filtering options which you have over here. Even for the analysis, you can decide to only show those members with the capacity ratio greater than this or less than that, or design ratio between certain limits, or this and that. So there's a lot of option for filtering which you have over here. In the general tab, you have your unique IDs which you can use. You can have actual assembly numbers generally over here. They could be applying to plates or profiles or anything else. You have formwork groups, you have classes, you have disciplines. So there's a lot of filtering options, and you can save these away with different names. What you can do in COMOSYS in general, like we've discussed elsewhere as well, is you can, every dialog box you see in COMOSYS will have a preset. And you can save away these presets and recall them and just load them, and they will help you getting your filtering done very, very quickly. Now let's continue with the detailing tab, which I had missed, and I'd gone on to the filtering tab. So in the detailing tab, we have certain things which are useful. So regarding the bolt imports, we can import the bolts as bolts only, or as holes only, or as all. So sometimes you don't want to show the bolts, but you still want to show the holes. So then you can change the style from here. And then it has the option of and there are certain drawing styles for the bolts. You can draw the bolts the default way, or as simple lines, etc. Similarly, for the rebars, we have different import styles. So we have the 3D fast, which is basically a faster algorithm for the 3D hidden lines, and as a 2D import as well, in which case the rebar will be imported as a 2D line, but the line will have the thickness of the diameter of the rebar. So it will basically look thick enough, as thick as the rebar diameter is, but in reality it will be a 2D import, which is what you normally do basically in your 2D rebar drawings. Now, these are options I want to show elsewhere. These are to do with rebar staggering in your, because I don't have a rebar example over here. But this is something I want to show, which is the crop model objects option. And what that does is, so for example, if I have this viewport over here, and I want to actually, so let's say I want to pull this back in a bit, and I don't want to see beyond this point. Now I can do that like this. That's very easy. But what if I actually wanted to cut the members off? I don't want to actually pull the viewport back in. I want the viewport to be over there, but I don't want to show elements beyond this point. I want to kind of crop while keeping the viewport. And the reason for that could be, maybe I want to write something over here and I want to show something over here, which is not a model object. So I don't want to use this option of squeezing the window limits inside. I want to keep them over there, and yet I want a vertical cropping line on the right, or on the top, or on the left, or on the right. So what I can do for that is, if I double click and go to the detailing menu, and I say crop model objects, like that, and I say 200, for example, this is in millimeters, and if I do that, the program will crop the model while keeping the viewport where it is. And so it's like creating a viewport within a viewport. And when I do that, then you can see that this gray viewport has been created within the blue viewport. And what that allows me now is to do certain things. Like, for example, I can create a zigzag line over here, for example. So what I can do is I can do something like snap somewhere over here, go down somewhere over here, and do that like that. Let me do it again, like that. Is it the shift one? Yeah, do something like that. Yeah, and I create this symbol, which is basically telling the program that I have cut it off from here. And after that, I can actually go in and create a text, maybe somewhere over here, and I can say maybe a horizontal line, and I can write something like whatever. I can say equipment limits maybe, and I have this option. So if I did something like this, if I had pulled it back in, that wouldn't have worked. I want the viewport to stay where it is and yet cut off the model objects at a certain point, and I can do that, like I said, from the right side, from the bottom, from the left, or from the top, the moment I choose this cropping option. And this is quite useful because in drawings, very often you have the requirements like this, that you want to draw something over here, you want to write something over here, but you don't want the model elements to be showing. And since your viewport is bigger than that, they do show, and you don't have any option of cropping them off. So this is very useful, and you can use it wherever it's required. Now that we are done with the viewports and the various tabs which we have for the viewports over here, let's move on to what is inside the viewport, which is basically whatever we filter, whatever objects we filter. And like I said, we can have, if I were to go back in there and quickly go to the filtering options and check out the objects which I have, we can import grids, we can import profiles, we can import joints, construction lines, construction circles. But more often than not, you will be, if you're dealing with steel general arrangement drawings, you'll be importing grids, profiles, plates, groups, and if it's concrete, then you might be importing rebars as well, and sometimes you'll be importing some solids as well, depending on the need. So these are the objects which you'll be having in your viewport usually. So over here in our viewport, for example, we have frames. So these are the frames. If I double click on any one of the frames, we can see that each one of them has a property editor. So this is the frame property editor. If I were to zoom in and double click on this plate, for example, then there's a plate property editor which is different from the frame property editor. Similarly, there is, if I were to select these bolts, for example, and double click on the bolt, there's a bolt property editor as well. So the first thing which you need to know is that when you have all these different objects, and if I were to do something like this, a multiple selection, and basically, if I wanted to select only the frames, I couldn't do that because we have a mixture of objects in there. Let's say I wanted to modify a particular property of the frames. That would not be possible. But with COMOSYS, since we have this on-the-fly filtering, if I just select like that and just press enter, it immediately tells me what I have selected. So it's telling me that you've selected 352 profiles, 1,714 plates, so many bolts, and some drawing objects. So whatever is not selected is grayed out. So let's say I wanted to select only the frames. If I selected the profiles over here, then on the right hand side, all my profiles, if I just double clicked on this top line, I could just select all the frames in one go. So if let's do that. Let's double click on this one. Now what it's done is it has removed the plates and the bolts from the selection. As you can see in the background, they have been removed from the selection, and only the frames are selected. And it has also opened the property editor of the frame so that I can make any modifications. So let's try doing that. The first thing which we can talk about in this dialog box is the line thicknesses. So as you can see, there are two line thicknesses. One is the normal line thickness, which you see over here, and one is the hidden line thickness. So every object in COMOSYS on the drawing side will actually have two line thicknesses, one for the normal line and one for the hidden line. And there will be a line style, and there will be another line style for the hidden lines. So normally in steel, obviously for the normal lines, you have a solid line style, and you can have a line thickness of say 0.3 millimeters. And for your hidden lines, you might have 0.1 millimeters. Actually, even if you have 0 in there, it's gonna still create a very, very thin line. But let's say we want a line thickness of 0.1 millimeters for the hidden lines. And for the hidden lines, I want a line style of say dash. This is the line style which I want for hidden lines. And my color can be yellow, for example, and for the hidden lines it's gray. And if I apply that, then those settings will be applied over there. And if I also press the set as default button, then any subsequent imports into the drawings will be done according to these settings, We'll talk about the default import settings later as well, but just trying to tell you that the most important settings of a frame element is the line thicknesses, the main line thickness, the hidden line thickness, the main line style, and the hidden line style. Then what you can do is you have things like definition line, center line, and gravity line, which you can turn on and off. So first of all, let's close this and zoom in and see that now we have these hidden lines of the previously there were dots, but now we have them in the form of dashed lines for the frames. But if you see the center lines are not being drawn. So the center line of this I-beam, which is over here, is not being drawn. The center line of this one is not being drawn. So for that, if I were to go back in, let's go and select everything, press enter, press my frames and double click on the profiles so that the property editor is open. If I go over there and I say definition line, I've got the options of definition line, center line, and gravity line. So let's turn on the center line definition and call it, let's say, a dotted line or a dash dot line, for example. It depends on what we want. And this is an offset, which we can give it. So let's give it an offset of, say, 3 millimeters. Let's see what it turns out to be. And press OK. When I do that and I zoom back in, you can see that the center line has been drawn. The center line is now there. It wasn't previously there. But what I don't like, for example, if I were to double click on that, I want to extend. I think this is the one. Yeah, this is the extension. This is the thickness. Actually, I did it wrong. Let me put it back at 0.1. And let's do an extension of 3 millimeters. Yes, so even 3 is not enough. So maybe I want, say, about 6 millimeters. That's probably a better number. Yeah, that looks like a reasonable number for a general. So let me go back in there, select everything, do the on-the-fly filtering, go in there, convert this back to 0.1, which was a mistake, and convert all these into, say, 7 millimeters, and say OK. And when I do that now, all my center lines have been entered, as you can see over there. And now you can even snap to the points of to the intersection points of these center lines. Now, obviously, you will not only give the extension line to the start, but you'll also give it to the end, because you want the extension line to extend on both sides. And when you do that, now, in this case, all the lines will be extended, as you can see over here. Every beam will have a start and an end extension, and you can now snap to these intersections as well. And obviously, you can do the same thing for the plates as well. If I were to press enter and select the plates only, I can go into my plate editor and give it a line thickness for the main and a line thickness for the hidden line. Line types, these need to be dashed. You can apply them and you can set them as default. You want to choose a different color for the plates, for example. You might want them to be blue, for example. Let's do that. Set them as default. Also, you have these other options which you can easily use for your grouping. Now, if I were to zoom in, you will see that the plates have been turned. All plates have been turned blue. You can do the same for the bolts as well. If I were to select everything, press enter. This time, select the bolts. Select all. I can select a particular diameter as well through on-the-fly filtering. But I can even choose a different color. For example, let's say green color for my bolts, for example. And when I zoom in, the bolts will be of that color. So this is a very easy way of changing these parameters for whatever it is that you have imported into your viewport. If you really wanted, you could even select by beam groups, for example. So if I went into my profiles and I grouped them according to the beam group, I could say I only want the horizontal braces to be selected, and now only the horizontal braces have been selected, as you can see. And maybe I can change their line color to something. Maybe I can change it to this color. And then if I do that, then I can see them in a different color. So you have those kinds of filtering options easily available. What you can even do is change their draw styles if you wanted to. So let me go back in, press enter, go to the profiles, and once again select them according to the beam group. Go to the horizontal braces. And this time what I can do is I can actually remove all the lines, their main and their dashed lines completely, and only draw their center lines as a solid line, for example. And in that case, I can decide to show the horizontal bracings only as lines, whereas everything else has been drawn properly according to the full profile section. So all these things are possible with this on-the-fly filtering and choosing different elements to be drawn differently. Now we've basically covered all the aspects of importing a viewport from the model into the drawing, and then changing the various properties of the viewport by going through all these settings, the label settings, the detailing settings, the filtering settings, the general settings which we talked about, etc. And we've also talked about changing individual parameters of the objects which are imported into that viewport by changing their line thicknesses, definition lines, colors, etc. All of these are useful, and all of these are required if you want to create a proper drawing. Now, the next thing, once we are happy with our viewports, like we talked in the beginning, that we discussed in the beginning, that in a drawing, typically the most important things you do is creating viewports, adding dimensions, and then adding annotations. So we have talked about creating viewports and in some detail. Now let's talk about creating dimensions. So in the dimensions tab, if you go to the dimensions menu over here, you've got lots of options which you can use for dimensioning. Most of them are for manual dimensioning, and some of them have to do with automatic dimensioning as well. So if you start from the left, we have horizontal dimensions, vertical dimensions, and aligned dimensions. So for example, all the dimensions over here will be horizontal dimensions, all the dimensions along this line will be vertical, and if we were to dimension this beam along this beam as well, then that would be an aligned dimension. So what you do is basically you click on the horizontal one, let's say, and when you do that, it asks for points. So let's zoom in and select this point, and the second one can be this point, and then it asks for a place where you want to release, where you want this dimension to be. Wherever you right click, the dimension will be created. If I were to double click on this one, I can open the dimension property editor, and I can see that it has certain options which we can talk about in a second. We have certain options for the arrowhead. We have different styles for the arrowhead, and we'll come back to this. But what I want to show you right now is if I were to right click this and say add point, then it can continue the dimension. So if I were to zoom in and add this point as well, and then I can pan while I'm doing that, I can add this point as well. I can pan and I can zoom in and I can select this one, and I can pan again and I can zoom in and I can select this one. And as I'm doing this, and whenever I right click I'll get out of the command. As I do that, my dimensions are being created. So it's very easy. You select an option, you select the points which you want to snap to, and whenever you're done with it, you just right click and you finish. And if you want to add points, you just select the dimension and you can say add point, delete point. These options are also available over here, add point and delete point. So if you select this one and you press add point, you can immediately go in there and say select this one and right click, and you would have added your point. Similarly, for the delete point option, if I chose the delete one, you can click on anywhere on these lines. Anywhere you click on these lines, and that particular dimension will be removed from the list. So that's very easy. What we can do is, if I were to double click on the dimension now once again, and the options over here are there are different styles. So this is the normal style. If I do the absolute one, then it will start giving absolute dimensions rather than relative ones. So it's 1000, 2000, 3000. This one is 5000, 6000. Similarly, I can give absolute and relative together if I wanted. So in that case, it will be 1000. This will be the total. Another 1000, total is 2000. Another 1000, the total is 3000, etc. So those options are available. You have control over your accuracy, so you can increase or decrease the precision with which you want your dimensions to be shown. Now, what other options? Like I said, you have these options of the various line styles. You can have a line, you can have a thick line, you can have arrowheads, you can have filled arrows, and you have control over their angle. So you can maybe reduce the angle of the arrows over there. So you have control over the size of those arrowheads, etc. The distance from the object is basically from the point which you chose to snap to. If I give it a distance of 3 millimeters, say for example, it will pull back those lines about 3 millimeters on your drawing from the point which you snapped to. So various options regarding that. What else is there? Okay, so there is one option related to the segmentation. So let me show you that for a second. So what I want to show you over here is this, that normally if I were to select this dimension, I can move it up and down, and the whole dimension moves moves together rather. But if I want, I can press this toggle segment option. So if I select this one and I say toggle segments, what happens is that now I can actually select individual elements, and I can actually move this one up separately, and I can move this one up different at a different location, and I can move this one let's say up like that. And once I remove the toggle element selection, the whole dimension is still together. Actually, I can still move them up and down together like that, but with using the toggle option, I have managed to separate parts of them, because sometimes you have certain things which are clashing along that line, and you don't want to move the entire line up, you only want to move a particular one up. So you can use this option of toggle segment, and if you wanted to bring it back to the original, all you need to do is just double click on that, and you say clear your segment movements, and you say okay, and all your segment movements will be. Now obviously the vertical dimensions are going to be done the same way as will be the aligned ones. So let me just quickly do one aligned one over here. Zoom in, snap to this point, snap to this point, and right click and create my dimension. Right click that, add a point to it, zoom in there, add a point, add another point, and you get the point. Basically, the idea is that you just keep selecting points, and depending on which particular type you have chosen, whether it's a horizontal dimension or the vertical one or the aligned one, you will get results according to that. Now you can, I'm not going to go through every one of these commands, they're pretty self-evident, but you can create slopes. For example, if I were a slope dimension, so if I were to, for example, if I wanted to give the slope of this, for what, now this would more often be used in concrete, but let's say I wanted to give the slope, I could just select 2 points on this line and a slope dimension would be created. If I wanted to give a level indicator, this is a plan view, so this one is more appropriate. All you need to do is just go and select a particular point, and the moment you do that, it'll pick up the level from the model, and after it's done that, you can place that anywhere you want on the drawing, and you will have created your level indicator for this plan view. Now obviously in this video I'm trying to give the training for manually creating dimensions, but we've discussed elsewhere that we for steel GA drawings we have the option of creating the dimensions automatically as well. So let me just briefly go over that. So this button over here which we have works for both steel GA dimensioning as well as for concrete. All you need to do is first press the shift key and press the button so that you can change some of the parameters over here. And under the general section, you have these two options of creating the steel work GA dimensions or creating the formwork dimensions. You can create both of them at the same time as well. So if this is selected, and as far as the steel GA arrangement options, you can turn certain things on and off. By default, any inclined members are turned off because that creates a clutter more than anything else. So it will basically do the main dimensioning for those elements which are lying in the XY plane of the drawing. And when we do that, all we need to do is just select the viewport and press this button, and your main dimensions, as you can see on the screen, will be created for you. Let's go over here. So all that the time you can waste by selecting and zooming in and selecting the points again and again, those will be done for you. Now the elements which are not in the plane, like the inclined ones, will not be dimensioned. So those you will need to go in and dimension yourself. So this is a very quick way of doing your steel dimensioning. Now that we've finished the subject of dimensioning your general arrangement drawings, let's move on to the topic of annotating the general arrangement drawings. And annotation is a broad topic. And the first thing I want to say is that all different kinds of objects can be annotated. So on the left side over here under the annotation menu, you have profiles, plates, cuts, joints, bolts, welds, and generic solids. And over here we have for the rebars. All these types of objects can be annotated. And by annotation, we mean basically showing any field related to that object on the drawing. So let's go into the profiles one. You have these little arrows beneath every one of them. And if I click on them, you see there are several options over here. One is to directly annotate using the current settings, or you can first modify the settings and then use the annotate command. And then there's a barrier settings, which more often than not you will not touch, but I will explain that as well. So if I go into my settings for the annotation of profiles, I'm going into the setting for the annotation of profiles. If I click on that, this dialog box open, and this is for profiles. And if you see on the screen, you've got all these fields to play with. So you can annotate the ID, for example. So let me just put these back in to start from scratch. So you can put your ID, for example. What you can do is you can just drag it into this box over here. You can drag it back. You can drag it into on the left side. You can drag it to the middle or the bottom. But more often than not, you will just drag it into the middle, and because it's going to find its place anyways. So you can drag the ID, for example, if you wanted to annotate the IDs of the elements. Let me put it back. You can drag in the profile name. So it's an IP 300. You want to see the profile name. If you can drag in the actual assembly number, so whatever the assembly number is, you might want to drag that in to be annotated. So or you could have a combination. So you might say, I want to see the profile name as well as the actual assembly number, and you can just drag those in like that. And you've got other things like actual assembly numbers in different formats, actual part numbers in different formats, the material, the name, special IDs, and you can even have fields related to your analysis. So for example, you can even say, I want to see the critical design combo of this element. So if you have 100 combos, load combinations, you want to see which particular combo was dominant, which governed the design of this member. So you can show that. So for this doesn't necessarily have to be a steel general arrangement drawing. This could also be your analysis report. You could submit your analysis report in the form of drawings rather than A4 booklets. So you can create several drawings that say all the plans and sections and show your design combos, critical design combos, and you can also show the critical design axial forces, bending moments, M22, M33, even the critical ratio, the stress ratio, the lambda ratio, the shear ratios, the deflection checks. You can have different drawings. For example, one drawing for the stress checks and one drawing for the deflection results and all that. Basically, you can access the fields. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the profile name and the actual assembly number. Then what you can do is if you went into these annotation settings, you have control over the font styles and the size of the fonts and the colors and this and that. So you can modify those from there. Let's just keep them whatever the default is right now. Say apply. Okay, so currently I've chosen the profile name and the actual assembly number in my settings. Once I'm okay with the settings, all I need to do is select any member and just go and say, okay, annotate this profile. And when I do that, immediately it annotates the profile section name as well as the actual assembly number. I can do that. I can select 3 of them and I can say annotate all 3, and all 3 will be annotated. I can select a whole group like that, and I can say annotate the selected profiles, and the program will find a place for them. If they're clashing with each other, it's going to, depending on your barrier settings, which we haven't discussed, but you can create everything. You can define your barriers, which objects you want to behave as barriers and which ones you don't want to behave as barriers. Depending on those, you can very easily create your annotations on the screen. There's a faster way to do this as well, which is you just select your viewport and you just say auto viewport, and what that will do is it will create the annotations for the entire viewport. And if you zoom in, you can see that very nice locations have been found. They're not clashing with each other, and there's no overlap. There's no cleaning work to be done. Even the very complicated areas have been sorted out pretty neatly. Obviously, this will depend on the scale of your drawing. If you have a very small scale, if you have a very cluttered drawing, then you might have a worse looking output. But usually the solution would that in those cases would be to slightly increase the scale, or maybe decrease the font size of the annotations, and one of them should work depending on what the situation is. Now, the same logic of, so if you go back to the profiles, there is one command for actually annotating, there's one for doing the settings, and one for the barriers. Like I said, you won't be using the barriers most of the time. So basically for settings and for actually creating. The same logic holds across the board over here. For the plates also, we have the settings and the annotation command, and for the rest. So for example, if I were to select this plate and I say create the annotation, I can immediately see the whatever field I have chosen inside that will show up. I can do the same for my bolts, for example. I can go in there and say annotate my bolts, and my bolts will be annotated. I can do that by a multiple selection as well. But what I want to mention over here is that these are obviously typically people do this in steel GA drawings or other drawings. But there's one thing I want to mention, which is the joints, which is a bit normally what you won't see. That we can actually annotate our joints as well. If I were to go into my joint annotation settings, you see that for the joints I have, because COMOSYS is an integrated program with finite element capabilities as well as detailing capabilities. So for the joints, I can have my maximum displacements in the X direction, the Y direction, Z direction, the combos which create those maximum displacements, the minimum XYZ displacements as well. So I've got lots of analysis related fields as well, which I can. So like I'd mentioned in the with the frames, that I can actually give my critical combos and my deflection checks and my stress checks. I can also create a drawing in which I have imported my joints. Obviously, for that, I will have to go into my filtering and go to my filter settings. And in my object types, I will also need to include my joints as well. I need to import them into the drawing. But if I do that, then I can annotate those joints with the fields I just shown. And this could be a very nice thing, because instead of creating these large reports in which you've got hundreds and hundreds of pages where the user needs to keep checking if so at some in some page it says joint number 3442 has a displacement of whatever 3.7 centimeters, and the user needs to go and find where this joint is located. So instead of that, what you can do is you can create these A0 drawings, for example, in which you have lots of viewports for all the plans and the sections, and all your joints are labeled over there. And on directly over there, you can put in your maximum and minimum deflections and the load combinations which are creating those, or the profiles are also shown, and you can show where how they're being stressed and which combos are stressing them the most. So this is a nice way of expressing your analysis related data in your annotation through your annotation in the drawings as well. Now, finally, we've gone through creating viewports, creating dimensions, and creating annotations. And this was the major part of creating GA drawings manually. Like I said, this is like 95% of the job. Obviously, you'll have little things left like importing notes or importing a title block, or maybe inserting some DXF symbols here and there to finalize your drawing. And I'll quickly go through those as well. So let's say we wanted to import a title block over here. You just go to the import section and say import a DXF. And over here, it asks for a file name. You can click on this button over here. And when I do that, you can, so I have got a sample stored away. Let's say sample DXF over there. And it's an A0 sample. This is a title block. When I do that, it imports that into the command. And then it has an option of anchoring. Say you can say anchor the bottom right of this imported DXF to the bottom right anchor the paper, the bottom right of the paper to the bottom right of the imported DXF, because I want the title block to be over here. I can give it certain movements as well if I wanted to. I can give it a scale as well, but the scale is okay in this case. So all I need to say is just press import and say close to this and close to this as well, and my title block will be imported into my drawing. Another requirement which I might have is to insert a few symbols here and there. Some of these symbols might be outside the viewports, and some might be inside the viewports. So the intelligent thing about symbols is that if it's outside the viewport, it'll come on a scale of 1 to 1. So whatever DXF symbol you have ready, it'll just be imported on a scale of 1 to 1. But if you import it inside a viewport, then the scale of that particular viewport will be taken. So, for example, if I were to go to this DXF symbol over here, and I click right now, there's a human figure inside, and I just press I clicked on any point. This human figure will be drawn over there on a 1:1 scale because it is drawn in actual human size. But if I were to click on this inside this viewport, then the human figure would take the scale of that viewport. So let me just delete this one. So in this way, you can actually, if you press Shift and you press the symbol, you can go to any DXF from you can go and select any DXF and import it into your drawings and insert it wherever you want. Now, similarly, if I wanted to insert some notes over there from a standard file, which I use continuously in my projects, I could have that stored away somewhere on my machine, and I can just go and call the multi-line text command, and I can just select a point, and then I can select a direction, let's say a horizontal direction, and then I can double click on that text and press this button over here, and this will allow you can change the text. You can write directly over there as well, but if you've got some notes stored away, what you can do is you can go to your desktop and you can say your general notes, and they will be pulled in, and if you say OK, then those notes can be placed on the drawing depending on where you want to place them and all that. As long as you've got them ready in your computer somewhere, you can just call as many as you want, and you can obviously do these things through the layout manager as well. But what I want to say is that once you're done with the viewports and the dimensioning and the annotation, adding the title blocks, adding some notes, adding some shapes, you can draw lines, you can draw zigzag lines, some polygons, rectangles, circles, you can draw clouds. So for example, what you could do is you could zoom in there and you could start drawing clouds around anything if you wanted to. And so those kinds of things are very easy to do. But the most time consuming parts are the first three, which is the creation of viewports, the creation of dimensions, and the creation of annotations. And those, as you saw, were actually not that difficult.